Okay, I'll try and do both keeping time and presenting this work. So this is actually one good example of bringing industry with academics actually on a blockchain project. This is about governing material reuse as a digital commons. It's a project which is a collaboration between Heriot-Watt University, University, Adventurous Systems, and the Sterling Reuse Hub. And it was funded by Scotland Beyond Net Zero, so a fund essentially that tries to decrease actually carbon in the whole of Scotland from that perspective. The challenge, those of you familiar with circular economy, right, is the circularity gap in construction, right? So we only have, at least in Scotland, 1.3% of processes actually being circular, and at the same time we know that about 37 to 40% of global CO2 equivalent emissions are attributed to the built environment. But also we as an industry produce massive amounts of waste, right? So we have no way of, or we have very limited ways of actually managing the waste on that level. And from our perspective, that's not just an environmental failure, but it's exactly a governance failure. It's a problem of institutional infrastructure to coordinate reuse across a very fragmented and decentralized ecosystem that is essentially construction. The other problem we have is that we have an industry that is regulated to work in a linear manner and in a linear supply chain, right? So we kind of start a project, we get the material in, and then there is no actually regulation or process of what to do actually at the end of life, right? This is a very hot topic at the moment. And essentially we don't have the supply chain to deal with circularity from our perspective. Even if we go on to the level of creating digital product passports, as the EU essentially has created the ESPR mandate, where construction products will have mandatory digital product passports from 2029 until last chance for governments to implement it on 2032. We don't think the construction industry has processes from that perspective. And even if you create the passports, right, there is a problem of who issues the passports, under what authority, with what conformity mechanism, and under when does the manufacturer, what happens when the manufacturer essentially is a volunteer-run charity, as the Sterling Reuse Hub that we worked with on this project. So the main idea is that we try to introduce the project that the paper is about, a circularity engine that works as a digital commons. So we don't try to create essentially a new digital platform that is proprietary, but actually use the ideas of Elinor Ostrom's design principles to map out commons. We understand materials available for reuse in Scotland, in the whole country, as a common pool resource. They are rivalrous because one builder's beam excludes another's, and partially also they are excludable. And our research question essentially was, how can we map out Ostrom's 8 principles to inform the idea of designing an EU compliant digital product passport. Essentially, what we did at the beginning of the project is create a set of 4 workshops with about 36 stakeholders from all places in the construction supply chain, from architects to local authorities, contractors, very few developers, I would have to say, reuse organizations, academics, but also a lot of third sector organizations. The method used for the workshops was one of design thinking, and in particular the cycle of empathize, define, ideate phases, and the 4 issues that we discussed with our stakeholders were ones of material and practical use, trust and quality of the data that you have on circularity, information and decision making, so how does that affect governance, process, and experience. We mapped out this in a map, and then discussions were analyzed using a Goya approach but also mapped out on an Ostrom institutional analysis overlay. And out of that, what we get are essentially 3 governance gaps that surface consistently across every category. And these are assurance, logistics, and information. There is essentially no verification pathway for reclaimed material quality right now. Everybody's building up that process depending on what kind of supply chain you have with your stakeholders. There is no coordination system for material availability and movement. In particular in Scotland, you have a very great location on, high density of materials around the central belt, around Glasgow and Edinburgh, and then a very decentralized kind of approach in Aberdeen and Inverness in the north, and then south in the borders. Exchange today is informal and is based on very personal networks. And in terms of information, there is no structured digital record comparable to the technical data sets available for new construction projects. If you had a question about how Ostrom actually fits with the EU Digital Product Passport, and this is what we did essentially on trying to structure the Ostrom principles around the governance gap and the Digital Product Passport requirements. And once you do that, you very easily then get a very good hint on what kind of smart contract mechanism you would use to map the digital commons, right? And I think this is kind of like the core contribution of the paper in terms of methodological rigor on that level. And at this point, this is what tells you what a passport must contain, whereas Ostrom tells you how to organize the institution that issues the passport, right? And you have a very good knowledge of what the passport should contain, but Ostrom design principles tell you why this should be a digital commons rather than a issuance from its constructor alone. And going further, going a little bit further beyond the paper and the initial research, this was mapping that was implemented and deployed. Trace is essentially a progressive web app built on VeChain Thor. It's live on trace.adventurous.system, so if you want to try it out, you can talk to me in the coffee break and I can give you an account. You can play the role of a circular construction hub or a developer or anything else. Right now, the platform actually implements only traceability. So you have an architecture that is very similar to the architectures that we saw in the previous 2 papers with content addressable systems and essentially a smart contract that works throughout the whole life cycle of the material. And on the lower part, you will see now essentially the next level of how we would like to build this, where we want to build essentially a circular build token and a governance token that would allow us to govern the digital commons, right? So the idea is to have everyone adopt the platform, and having it as a digital commons makes it much more easy from that perspective. Yeah, the blue data flows are showing essentially data and integrity, and the orange dust flows are governance and incentive. And from that point of view, what we want to test now, even looking at gamification methods, would be on what kind of incentives and governance mechanism we would use to scale the system to beyond just one circular construction hub. Yeah, so in terms of the data and what the passport looks like, it's essentially a JSON linked data schema, and essentially on the back end, it's compatible with environmental data according to EN 15804. It's extended for reclaimed materials, so we realized essentially that we should have it compatible with EU regulations, and from that point of view, you can use our system even just for virgin materials, right? But the passport actually has extensions for circular materials, including certifiability, conformity for certain regulations, and so on and so forth. And of course, there also the quality certifications are issued as W3C verifiable credentials. These are the 7 smart contracts operating at the moment. And as I explained, the boundaries, congruence, monitoring are the layers that are active. The governance in the hub registry will actually come in later when we have, the trace governance hub registry are already active, but what we don't have yet is a circular bill token and the governance token to go with it. But we are looking now to scale the system with other stakeholders, and from my point of view, we will need to actively create those as well. And with that, I will close, and if you have any questions, happy to answer.